typical English person, I have one language and I can order beer and baguettes in Spanish and French. Fortunately, your English appears to be better than mine, so I think we'll be okay. I talked yesterday, for anybody who wasn't here, I apologise that I'm going to skip over some fairly important points, but I covered things that I don't want to cover again. What I wanted to do is to talk about some of the practical examples of things that we're doing under our government's action plan. So, without further ado, what I wanted to do is just say that we in the UK have been regularly self-inspecting our performance on hate crime. It's always been seen as a significant issue. Successive ministers have referred to an adequate response to hate crime being a sign of a thriving democracy, and that's kind of how we see it, and that's how we embed our policy. And it's seen as a core part of our human rights approach. And the first of the modern examinations of our relationship, particularly with the black community, was this report, called the Scarman Report, which took place after the Brixton riots that took place in 1981, where the largely African Caribbean community had such a bad relationship, had such issues around poverty and education standards, that there was serious public disorder that broke out through the 1980s. And the report talks about the police tactics and about how oppressive police tactics had contributed to that breakdown. And then I mentioned yesterday the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and here is an image, ironically, of one of the murderers walking past to give evidence in the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. And that really did change everything. I'm not going to repeat what I talked about yesterday. What's different from yesterday is about the response to that. So in 2005, ministers took the view that we needed to review where we were against the 70 recommendations of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and the thing that flipped and went was a report called Race for Justice, which brought around a review of that, and brought around the hate crime programme that I mentioned yesterday. And what we have here is a scheme of the programme. It is really kind of, I take no credit for this. This is the programme I run, and this was designed and I was brought in to run it. So I take no credit for it. But I believe it's one of the most simple, straightforward ways that a government can deal with an issue that's multidisciplinary. So things like domestic violence, things like rape and sexual violence. It's dead simple. You just get the departments who are relevant to it. So that for us includes the Foreign Office, it includes health, it includes Department for Transport where it's appropriate. So we get all of those governments represented, and we have a very small team, which is kind of a very small team, that run a programme like the choreographers I mentioned yesterday. But you also bring in the criminal justice agencies, because the delivery of hate crime responses for the state without the criminal justice is self-evidently not sufficient. So we have that board where all of those people sit on. And most importantly, and I can't overstress this, we have an independent advisory group which has got the parents of murdered victims of hate crime, it's got advocacies, it's got academics, who sit as an integral part, and the chair of that and the rolling one member of that group sit on that strategy board. So they don't dictate ministers' decisions, but no decision should ever be taken by a minister where the view of the IAG doesn't form an integral part of their thinking as they make that decision. So that's how we structured. So what we've then had is a succession of action plans. And you'll see the last two here, but there's been successive action plans right the way back to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. And these are the last two. So one in 2012, which was refreshed in 2014, and then the current one, and this is an easy read version of it, which leads into the disability issue that I'm going to talk about, which is designed for people with learning disability who need an easy read version. So these are the plans. So if I concentrate on the last one, the current one, which was published in July 2016, I just want to pick out the 5 core responsibilities from it. So you can see there, you can see, I've got my glasses away. So you can see, I'm going to stand here. So you can see that the 5 main strands of that are preventing hate crime, dealing with hate crime when it does occur through criminal justice and the like. Massively importantly, number 3, because of the data I gave you yesterday, getting more people to report hate crime, then improving services and doing more to understand. So working with academics like Mark Walters, who you're going to talk about later, to understand about the implications of hate crime from an academic perspective. So I'm just going to quickly go through, if I may, 3 strands of the work that's within this. There is lots of work. It covers everything from hate crime in the nighttime economy, because we know that lots of racist crime happens to people who work when people are drunk, so taxi drivers, takeaway owners, restaurant owners, and staff would suffer hate crime disproportionately. So it's got lots of different bits of action. I've just picked out 3 that I think are particularly challenging, particularly important, or particularly relevant. So, the first I'm going to talk about is disability hate crime, and I can't overstress the importance of this as a challenge. And when I look internationally, it's one of the areas that many states don't include. Lots include it in the legislation, but don't include it in the response. And what happened for us is, in 2007, when we were tasked with coming together to bring this common definition of hate crime, which I referred to yesterday, we were faced with a barrage of tragic, horrible cases where disabled people were attacked. And I mentioned Stephen Hoskins yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat it. So Stephen is on the left. Brent Martin was a very similar case. He was a 19-year-old lad who spent most of his life in institutions, either health or educational and residential institutions, because he suffered from learning disability and he had some physical disability. And Brent came out and went on to a deprived estate in the north of England. And he was at 19, he hadn't got friends on that estate. All the rest of the estate, which was a fairly enclosed estate, had all gone to the same schools. They'd all had the same friends through their youth. Brent came out and hadn't got that background. He hadn't got the social skills to be able to make new friends. He hadn't got the social skills to impress people, to become their friend. So he started to gather around younger and less socially capable groups. And he ended up befriending a group of youths who were 15, 16. And they started to abuse it. They saw an advantage in him. They realised that he was old enough to buy alcohol, he got money because he got benefits that they didn't get. He could go and buy alcohol and would share it with them. He could buy drugs. And they allowed him into the friendship, in this fake friendship. And it generated very similar to Stephen Hoskins. And they ultimately went and took it in turns to punch him in the face. And they had bets on who was the first one who could knock him down. And the first one to knock him down got £5 from the others. And then they decided they'd do the same with the left fist, so they kind of tried it again. And ultimately, they dehumanised him, same as Stephen Hoskins. They degenerated in their behaviour. They become massively abusive. They eventually stripped him naked and sexually abused him, not for sexual gratification, but for sexual degradation, for want of a better word. And then they left him naked and beat him to death and left him in the street. Very similar circumstances. Christine McKinsky, a lady who was physically disabled, who actually died in the street of natural causes. She had pancreatic failure and collapsed in the street. And a group of youths who had been tormenting her in the estate where she lived for weeks and months had started to abuse her as she lay dying on the street. They put wood on top of her, they poured water over her, one put shaving foam over her. And then ultimately one of them urinated on her while another one recorded it on the mobile phone to post it onto YouTube, and they said this would be great fun. And kind of what they seem to show is the absolute disregard for disabled people as human beings. They dehumanised and saw them as not worthy of the same level of protection. And then finally, a tragedy that happened in 2007, Fiona Pilkington and her daughter Frankie Hardwick. They were terrorised in their estate. Lots of it relatively minor, antisocial behaviour, but some of it more serious, arson to furniture around their house. Their son was held captive at knife point at one point. But over a 10-year period, they suffered significant abuse from many people in their estate. It wasn't one person, it was a group, it wasn't even a group, it was lots of people in the community that alienated them and treated them badly. And ultimately, Fiona Pilkington went and took her daughter in their car and poured petrol and set fire to the car with them both in it and killed them both. And the inquest that followed said that the lack of coordination from the police and the local authority in their response and the lack of care contributed to her decision to take their life. And I just pause and say, can we ever imagine a situation where any of us would think the best thing we can do to protect the ones we love is to take their lives, to protect them from what they're facing in this life. And it's really difficult, and it shows the challenges. And all of these cases were investigated to varying degrees. That obviously the latter was slightly different, and the disability hate crime element didn't come out until the inquest in 2009. But the first three were all successfully investigated, they were all successfully prosecuted, but not one was recognised as a hate crime. And we felt that was a seriously important issue to address. And here's a statement from the Director of Public Prosecutions, who's the head prosecutor, who said that he'd expressed the view that disability hate crime cases weren't always being treated as they should, and importantly, he said this is a scar on the conscience of the criminal justice system. So some of the key challenges I mentioned about the underreporting, hugely disproportionate compared to other types of hate crime. There's a real lack of understanding in the police, including management, in health and social care professionals, carers, and victims themselves and the families. There's an issue we have about vulnerability. Is this somebody who is a vulnerable person who's been attacked, or is it about hostility or lack of respect for them because of their disability? And we have different responses to vulnerability when we go through a safeguarding process than we do from victimisation. And what we say to professionals is really important. The solution to safeguarding may be criminal inquiry. The solution to a criminal inquiry may be safeguarding of the victim. But the reality of it is you've got to see it as a criminal act. So we know that the context, as you say, is different. More victims of disability hate crime are more likely to know their offender. They're more likely to be subject to repeated attacks in an escalating nature. I'm just going to show you, if we've hopefully got sound, I should have checked this. I'm just going to show you a 2-minute clip of a video. And this was an Undercover video taken by the BBC, and it's a couple of extracts from it, and it's a place called Winterbourne View. Will this sound work? There's no sound just yet. So. Oh, sorry, just. Okay, sorry about this. So, try again. Successful. Just wait a second. There's no sound for the first few seconds. So this is Winterbourne View, a residential unit. This is a state-funded.
Simon, please put your trousers on.
Here's Wayne again in the red.
And these are carers.
Here's Simone, pinned beneath a chair by Wayne. This isn't restraint, it's a serious assault. Another carer, Graham, wraps a blanket around her head. 30 minutes later, jacket off, Wayne's still there. Simone has been largely passive. And now Graham seems to have her in some kind of headlock, whilst another carer hands out sweets. It seems the same woman who Wayne dragged out of bed in the morning has just attempted to jump out of a second-story window. Wayne's there. and another carer, Nino, pretend they're in a gangster film.
I'll make a phone call and get them back.
Then, out of the blue, Wayne leaps on a patient in the corner.
So what we've got there is we've got state-funded disability hate crime. They are paid a wage by the state to protect those people. One of the fortunate thing to that is they were convicted of disability hate crime and they were sentenced to prison to varying degrees based on their kind of contribution to that. One of the things that really caused offence to our independent advisory group is that the BBC did a really good job in exposing that hostility. That was an undercover reporter that they put in. They waited on that video for 3 months. They took the reporter out, and they took 3 months for them to process their video footage to post it on TV. And they didn't hand it over to the police or the authorities until the day of the publication, because they didn't want the sub judice rules that we have to interfere with their planning. So they left those victims with those offenders for 3 months, having recorded on not even a multiple basis per day, not even on a daily basis, hostility, which on a couple of occasions was possibly life-threatening. On one occasion, one of the girls was left outside in sub-zero temperatures, as it was described, having had water poured over her. So it shows that the hostility that exists in society. So I'm going to move on and talk about relationship with civil societies, and I'm just going to talk briefly about hate speech to build on what we talked about yesterday. So I mentioned some of this yesterday, in that we have those relationships, and what I've exposed here is an example of Tal Mama, which I mentioned yesterday, that supports Muslim victims. I talked about the importance of working in partnership with organisations that can meet our ideals, that have the rigours around the data, have the kind of the constructive relationships, but ultimately share our ideals about equality and fairness. And once we have that, and once we have the trust, and once we have the systems in place, what we want to do is to provide them support. So things like True Vision allows them a reporting mechanism that works for them all the time, that they don't have to create one from themselves. And then what that allows us to do is agreements like this, and you can see these on the True Vision website. They're data sharing agreements that we sign with some of our main charities. And what it allows us to do is identify materials like this. So this is a breakdown of Greater Manchester's anti-Muslim hate crime over a period of time. And it allows us to see both sides of the coin. It allows us to get the crimes that are reported to Talman and the crimes that are reported to the police, and identify those that one side knows about but the other side doesn't. So we get to see a more complete picture. And that's really valuable to us, particularly in short-term response. So I'm going to talk finally about the issue of hate speech. Now, this is a model by Gordon Allport, an American social psychologist in the 1950s. And it's his scale of discrimination. It's well documented in academia. And he talks about 5 stages. He talks about antilocution, the talking ill of people. Then you move on to avoidance, discrimination, physical attack, and execution. So obviously execution is rarer, but more impactful. Hate speech, antilocution, is more prevalent, but less damaging. Ultimately, we believe that nobody starts at the top. Everybody works their way up. And not everybody who gets to the bottom will go on to kill, if unchecked. But everybody who goes on to kill will have started at the bottom. So that issue we talked about yesterday, about the toolkit that says we believe the proper approach to this is all of those things. It is counter-narrative, it is management by social media companies, it is law enforcement. It has to have all of those elements, and we have to apply them all when they're appropriate. And when we look at some of the issues here, this is something that was picked up in South Africa just after the xenophobic murders, as they were called, in 2008. And what we had is asylum seekers who were fleeing conflict in Rwanda and Darfur and other areas, seeking asylum in South Africa and being in the township, and facing posters like this, "Go home or die here." Clearly hate speech, but clearly intended to intimidate. Then we move on to the more sinister, more organised And this is an image from Radio Kigali, and you'll all know the impact that Radio Kigali had on the Rwandan genocide. It referred to people as cockroaches. It demonized over and over again a group in society who then went on to be subject to genocide. So that hate speech has a direct and indirect result. And these are two examples from the UK. Khan on the left was the ringleader of the July the 7th bombings in 2005 in London, and David Copeland set off nail bombs in 1999. What we don't know is whether, we know that they were both exposed to hate material. We know that everybody who goes on to believe this, to do things like this, has been exposed to hate material. What we don't really know is whether it's causal or effect. Did they were exposed to the material because they had those views, or did they act out because they were exposed to the material? So we can only guess what that is. So in terms of policing the internet, some of the challenges. There used to be an American academic called Raymond Franklin, who measured hate sites before Web 2.0. And he stopped doing it in 2010 because it was no longer measurable. Because before Web 2.0, if I wanted to post hate material, I had to have my own site, or I had to have permission from you to post it on your site. So there was an editorial control, or you own the site. Web 2.0 will have to change that, and suddenly I could be anonymous. Suddenly I would act more serious because or more extreme because I'm anonymous. But it also meant that I could post on your website without anybody knowing from the outside who I was, and the only person who would have the IP address is the host. So there's huge international legislative disparity. It was mentioned yesterday about the First Amendment to the American Constitution, which is a huge issue, particularly given so much of the internet infrastructure is there. There's a huge challenge about capacity versus prevalence, gaps in our understanding, significant gaps around the impact that it has on communities. We can't know, and we use in the UK phrases like testament of the advisory group because we don't have the evidence. And as I mentioned, that link between exposure to hate material. Me and my team are exposed to hate material on a daily basis. We don't go out and kill that, but we know that people who do go out and kill have been exposed to it. So trying to work out that understanding. And then there's opportunities as well as threats, and we need to occupy the common ground. We're probably 15 years too late into these negotiations, but Europe and the European Commission and a thing called the Cyber Hate Working Group that I sit on have started to try and get that collaborative relationship with the internet industry. So I just put this up as a schematic to show how we used to investigate hate speech offences, because they were normally over the telephone. They were normally offensive telephones or letters. And if we wanted communication information, we'd get a complaint from a member of the public. We as the police would then go to the British Telecom or Virgin, whoever provides it, and say, we've got this telephone number, we want the subscriber details, because we believe there's an offence. And we'd get served a court order or an exception, and they would give us the information, we would go and do it. The internet and social media changed that, because the reality is the complaint comes to the police. We can only get that subscriber address from the internet service providers like BT and Virgin by giving them the IP address that's posted. Yet when on your Facebook page you can't see the IP address of somebody who posts on your page. So if they're using a fake identity, the only way we can get that is through the host. And the host is a couple of examples. Facebook, who are based in America and subject to the US Constitution and the First Amendment. And the sites themselves, which are hate sites, which clearly aren't going to help you. So we set up an agreement with our internet service providers. They give us part of the address that told us the city when we give them the IP address. We've never once tested it because we've never once been given the IP address. We've brought around lots of convictions, but they've come through traditional investigation. I'm just going to very briefly kind of talk through some of the legislation. First Amendment we mentioned. The EU countries, bizarrely, without the UK, are subject to a framework decision on racism and xenophobia, which says that we have to have incitement legislation and we have to have legislation that criminalises the denial of the Holocaust. So we think we comply with that in the UK, but we're not subject to it because we opted out, but the rest of the 28 are. There's a protocol from the Council of Europe on cybercrime, which again the UK hasn't adopted, but is there as an international organisation standard. And then there was a couple of resolutions in the OSCE, particularly Ministerial Council Decision 909, which called on all of the member states to work together, to collaborate, to look for opportunities to reduce the harm caused by the hate on the internet. And that was kind of as strong as it got, because the Americans and others didn't want to sign up to anything more strong, and because the OSCE is a consensus-based organisation, it goes for the lowest common denominator. But for me, this is one of the most important cases where we come to hate speech, which I've kind of mentioned, which is a bloke called Roger Garaudy versus France. He took France to the European Court of Human Rights, claiming that they breached his Article 10 right to free speech. And he's a Holocaust denier. He's a person who says that the Holocaust is no, and publishes his thoughts. So he was published in France, denial of the Holocaust is a criminal offence. He was convicted, and he took it to court saying that that was a breach of his Article 10 human rights. And the court rejected his appeal and upheld the France's decision. And they rejected it saying that the right to free speech does not extend to the right to rewrite history or to incite hatred against a group on racial grounds. So for me, that's a really important case which shows that parameter there is. There's also another important case which kind of hasn't really been understood yet, but a case called Delphi versus Estonia, where Delphi is a host and hosted material that somebody else posted on their website, which was seen to be a criminal offence. And Estonia prosecuted Delphi for posting this, even though they didn't post it, they were just the host. And they, again, took a similar appeal, which is lost and lost its appeal. So Estonia were upheld and found to be acting legitimately. So even when the host wasn't the person who posted it, they could be held criminally responsible. And I don't think many of the hosts have really kind of thought through that. I just wanted to give this as another example, a different example of how we use social media. This picture on the right is a still from a video, which is a British Sign Language video. So it's used for deaf people to sign language about hate crime and what it is. And this is the result of the advert. And you'll see that, to put it in context, the census tells us there's 10,000 people who use British Sign Language in the UK. Facebook could identify 16,320 people. And the charities say there's actually significantly more than that because there's family members and the like. But this could identify 16,320 people who were interested in BSL. So what this tells us is that the campaign reached 14,306 of those people, sorry, I'll wreck your screen, 125 times each. And most importantly, 688 clicked on that site to download the video. So we've reached around about 1% or more of the entire population for £251.90. So this is a fantastic way to reach out to victims. So I'm going to just finish off, just to put some examples about what we would perceive to be criminal or non-criminal in our response to hate crime. So these are not overly offensive, but there is one fairly offensive material, but there's nothing gratuitous in there. But hopefully I'll explain when the offensive is coming up. So, in terms of what can be criminal, this is Liam Stacey, who was a 23-year-old student who was convicted of racially aggravated public order. Fabrice Malamba on the right is a footballer who had a cardiac arrest, collapsed playing football in a Taliban's match. And Liam Stacey tweeted out some really significant racist material, really horrible. But he had 32 followers on Twitter. And what lots of people have said is actually that was a private communication between him and others. The court don't accept that. He actually pleaded guilty, so it wasn't like he denied it. He pleaded guilty to the offence. But the court accepted that because he was posting it on material on the internet, it was a public space. And effectively our courts have deemed, in a number of cases, the internet is a public space. So the advice we give to professionals and to the public is don't say anything on the internet that you wouldn't say in front of a police officer, because the outcome could be the same. And then I talked about the prevalence, and I consider there's lots of offensive material in here, some of it possibly illegal, and I say possibly because when we talk to prosecutors and we talk to police officers, we say it's really 5% content and 95% context. Because one of our most repeated victims, a football commentator who's black, ex-footballer, gets lots of racist abuse. He retweets it every time he gets racist abuse, he retweets it. Not many people would think he should be criminalised because what he's doing is showing the horrors of racism that he faces. But the content is the same, so we say it's about content. But here we have a really innocuous story. Somebody's posted on Facebook, this young lad has opened a biscuit, a packet of biscuits, and in the chocolate on the bottom of the biscuit, in Arabic, it says the word how the chocolate's formed. So somebody posted it on Facebook, a really innocuous story. And we counted about 100 pieces of material, offensive material, and you can see some of it. We counted about 100 offensive material, which was more serious or more sinister or more racist than the stuff that people have been convicted of. And each one is a different criminal offence. So you've got one website with maybe 100 offenders attached to it. So that issue of prevalence is a real challenge to us. We've got stuff like this, which is deeply offensive, anti-Muslim, racist material. And I say potentially illegal, because if they were on holiday, they might have a British account, but if they were on holiday in America when they posted, it wouldn't be. So we have that issue. We've got stuff like this, which is offensive, causes offence, but probably is legal. The stuff on the right, if you look at it, you would say, if you cover up the bottom bit and you see who's posted it, you could say the top is about misogynistic right. It's about rights to be protected from misogyny. So that could be argued to be satire for the intention of raising the issue of the rights of women to be free from violent abuse. And it's depicting things that have happened in history or in recent history in parts of the world. So you could say that that would be about equal rights and pro-rights. But when you look who's published it, it's published by the English Defence League, a racist organisation that's trying to stir up hatred, you realise that clearly isn't their intention. It's about demonising a whole population. And then we have stuff like this. Similar materials that you could argue were about children's rights. These are paedophile rapists. These are men who have been convicted of grooming and raping young girls and then using their hold over them to make money by making them have sex with multiple people. Now they are convicted paedophiles. Again, this could be argued it's about exposing children's rights as an issue. But when you look at it, and when you look at the language, and when you look at the title, you realise that it's significantly racist material intended to stir up hatred. And then you get material like this, which is just political satire. Causes offence, but it's equal and equitable satire aimed at religion and the effect of religion. And I'm just going to, sorry, I was going to warn you about the next one. So the next one is one of a series of websites which has probably caused the most distress to my colleagues. It is deeply offensive material. It targets a 6-year-old American girl with a terminal illness. And apologies, I've showed you before I give you the warning. Feel free not to look at this. There's nothing gratuitous, and this is one of the least offensive of them. But you'll see that this targets a young girl who's not going to be exposed to this. She's a 6-year-old girl, you've got to be 13 to use Facebook, she's clearly not going to be seeing this. And this was about the least sinister. Adalia Rose's mum took her onto TV in America to highlight the plight of the condition that she suffers and the impact on the families and the lack of medical care and consideration of the condition. So she took her onto a morning TV show. Hundreds and hundreds of websites like this were started up immediately, and you'll see that their comment, they're almost preparing the defence as they do. Controversial humour, this might not please your morals, in inverted commas, but we don't give a fuck. So you can see that it's intended to offend, but the reality of it is, Adalia Rose was never going to see this. Her family would maybe be aware and deeply offended by it. But the reality of it is these were undoubtedly American-based offenders. These were young men, probably, in America, relating to an American-only subject. Well, we had about 100 complaints from disabled people and families of disabled people and people who just care about disabled people. We had about 100 complaints made to the police in the UK because of the impact of similar sites, and some were more sinister. And at the time, Facebook said this was acceptable humour. They wouldn't now, to be fair. Facebook have come a long way since then. But they accepted it was acceptable humour. Now, we as the police felt that we had a responsibility to intervene, and we actually commented and approached the people who had these to say, look, you need to know how offensive this causes, how much offence this causes. We in the UK police have had a complaint about this. We will investigate it, and if there's any offences, we'll prosecute. We're making threats we can't live through. But actually, we felt that we were justified in interacting on that because of the harm that was being caused. And around about half of them that we interacted with disappeared immediately. They took it down immediately, and the other half came back and went for our throats and said, words to the effect of, and this was a common one, what you don't seem to realise is we live in a civilised society with a constitution that protects our rights, so go F yourself. And then that was kind of their response. So it's about 50-50. And we were really posting as much for the people who were offended by it to show that we care as we were about an expectation that we were going to resolve it. It's fortunate to say that Facebook has moved on now. So hopefully that's just a kind of three-pronged example of the sorts of things that are going on in the UK under the action plan. The action plan and everything else you can see from True Vision. My contact details are on the circulation and they've been on the website. Feel free to contact me outside if I can assist in any way, or we can assist in any way, and I hope it's been of some value to you. Thanks very much.